If you ate a lion steak tonight, your body might start fighting you before you even finish chewing. Not because it tastes bad, not because it's illegal, because somewhere deep in your biology there's an ancient warning system that's been screaming, "Don't," for thousands of generations. And almost nobody has ever stopped to ask why it's there. Here's a number that sounds fake, but isn't. Humans currently raise over 1 billion cows, tens of billions of chickens every single year, and endless herds of sheep, goats, and pigs just to eat them. Now think of the last time you saw wolf on a menu, or eagle, or lion. You haven't. Nobody has. Across every continent, every culture, every century of human history, we built entire civilizations around eating grass eaters, and somehow, without ever comparing notes, every single one of those civilizations agreed on the exact same unspoken rule: never eat the hunters. That's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. And patterns like that always have a reason hiding underneath them. So let's dig it up, piece by piece, starting with the one nobody expects: math. In the 1940s, a scientist figured out something called the 10% rule, and it's honestly one of the most brutal facts in all of biology. Every time energy moves up one step in a food chain, about 90% of it just vanishes, burned off as body heat, wasted on movement, lost during digestion. So imagine a field of grass holding 100 units of energy. A deer eating that grass only locks in about 10 of those units. Now, a wolf eats that deer, and the wolf only keeps 10% of what the deer had left. That means the wolf is running its entire body on roughly 1% of the energy that started in the grass. 1%. To grow a single pound of predator, you basically need to sacrifice 10 pounds of prey underneath it, and that prey needed 100 pounds of plants underneath that. Farming predators isn't just expensive. It's economically insane. You'd be feeding an animal whose entire diet is other animals you also had to feed. No civilization on Earth has ever had that much extra food lying around to burn on a single meal. This is actually why almost every farmed animal you've ever eaten is a plant eater. Cows, chickens, pigs, sheep, they all sit near the bottom of the energy pyramid, which is exactly why feeding them is cheap and their numbers can explode. A predator sits 3 or 4 steps higher, and every step higher roughly multiplies the food bill by 10. Scale that up to an entire country, and predator farming doesn't just get expensive, it becomes mathematically impossible. But even if the math somehow worked out, there's a second problem. And this one is actually dangerous. Poison. Not the kind you can see or taste, the kind that quietly builds up over an entire lifetime. It's called biomagnification, and here's the terrifying part. It's real. It's happening right now, and it explains one of the biggest wildlife disasters of the last century. Toxins like mercury don't disappear when an animal eats them. They get stored. A small fish absorbs a tiny bit of mercury from the water. A bigger fish eats hundreds of those small fish and absorbs all of that mercury at once. Now a shark eats hundreds of those bigger fish. Every single step up the chain, the poison gets more concentrated, not less. This is exactly why doctors tell pregnant women to avoid shark and swordfish today, not because those fish are naturally toxic, but because they've spent years sitting at the top of a chain quietly soaking up everyone else's poison underneath them. And this almost wiped out an entire national symbol. In the mid-1900s, a pesticide called DDT washed into rivers, got absorbed by algae, then fish, then the bald eagles that ate those fish, concentrating more and more at every level, exactly like the mercury. By the 1960s, DDT had built up so heavily inside American bald eagles that it thinned their eggshells until the eggs literally cracked under their own mother's weight, sitting in the nest. Bald eagle numbers crashed to under 1,000 breeding pairs in the entire continental United States before DDT finally got banned. That's what happens to an animal's body after a lifetime spent at the top. Whatever poison exists anywhere underneath it eventually ends up concentrated inside it. And it's not just old pesticides either. The same buildup is happening today with mercury, lead, and industrial runoff nobody's closely tracking. Sample apex predator meat anywhere on Earth right now, and you'd still find measurably higher toxin levels than in any grass-eating animal on the same continent. The chain hasn't stopped concentrating poison just because DDT got banned. It just switched which chemical it's stockpiling. And this danger isn't some new scientific discovery either. Explorers learned it the absolute hardest way possible, over 100 years ago. Sled dogs crossing the Arctic have known for generations, purely by instinct, to never touch polar bear liver. Human explorers didn't get that memo. In the early 1900s, Members of an Antarctic expedition, desperate and starving, ate husky liver to survive, and within hours they were doubled over with violent headaches while their skin literally started peeling off their bodies. Scientists later figured out exactly what happened. Polar bear and husky liver store such an insanely concentrated dose of vitamin A that a single serving can poison a fully grown adult almost to death. One organ, one meal. That's all it takes. Indigenous communities across the Arctic had known to avoid it for centuries, long before any lab ever explained why. Then there's what predator meat actually does to itself, long before it ever reaches a plate. Prey animals mostly just graze peacefully. Predators sprint, stalk, and fight for every single meal they get, which means their bodies are constantly flooded with stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol. That stress drains the natural tenderness out of muscle and replaces it with something tougher, gamier, and often carrying a strong, musky flavor from hormone compounds packed deep into the tissue. On top of that, predator muscles are loaded with extra myoglobin, the protein responsible for storing oxygen during high-speed chases, which is also exactly why predator meat looks darker and tastes far more intense and metallic than anything you're used to. Hunters who've actually eaten mountain lion or wolf during real survival situations describe it the same way almost every time. Technically edible, but never something you'd choose if you had literally any other option. And speaking of options, here's the part that should really freak you out: disease. Predators don't just hunt healthy animals. They specifically target the sick, the old, and the weakest members of any group, because those are the easiest to catch. Which means predators are also eating every parasite and pathogen that sick animal was already carrying. A dangerous parasitic infection called trichinosis, once common in undercooked bear and wild boar, spreads specifically through predator and scavenger meat for exactly this reason. And there's an even scarier possibility lurking underneath that one: prions. A prion is a broken, misfolded protein that can turn healthy proteins in your brain into broken copies of itself. And there's no cure, no way to destroy it with heat or normal cooking. Prion diseases show up dramatically more often in animals that eat other animals, which is a huge part of why an entire industry once triggered a global health scare simply by feeding cows to other cows. Eating high up the food chain doesn't just risk parasites, it risks diseases science still barely understands. There's actually a name scientists use for this whole danger zone: trophic accumulation. It covers everything that quietly piles up the higher you climb a food chain: poison, parasites, stress hormones, all stacking inside the same animal at once. A grazing animal only deals with whatever's in the grass. A predator deals with the grass, plus everything in every animal it ever ate. By the time predator meat reaches a human mouth, it's carrying the accumulated risk of an entire chain, not one link in it. Now, the rule isn't completely absolute, and honestly, the exceptions actually prove it rather than break it. Bear meat has occasionally been eaten in parts of Scandinavia and North America for centuries, but almost always in tiny amounts and cooked until it's basically sterilized. Lion meat has shown up in parts of Africa only during the worst possible famines, when starving communities had genuinely run out of every safer option. Even today, South Africa runs a legal lion farming industry, but it exists almost entirely to sell lion bones into traditional medicine markets, not to sell lion steaks. And conservation groups have fought against it for years. Every single documented case where humans turned to predator meat happened only after every safer alternative had already completely run out. That's not a counterexample. That's the rule proving itself. And somewhere along the way, culture caught up with biology and made the whole thing official. Ancient religious law explicitly banned eating birds of prey and clawed hunters, naming eagles, vultures, and hawks directly. A completely separate dietary code developed on the other side of the world with zero contact drew the exact same line, banning animals that hunt with fangs or talons. Civilizations that never met each other, never shared a language, never shared a single idea, somehow landed on the identical unspoken boundary: eat the grazer, spare the hunter. Some experts think this was never purely about safety either. Predators were feared, respected, sometimes worshipped, across dozens of unrelated cultures. And you don't put the animal your entire mythology is built around onto a dinner plate. You don't eat the creature carved onto your king's throne or painted on the walls of your temple. So the real answer was never just one single thing. It's biology stacking on chemistry, stacking on culture, all pointing in the exact same direction at once. Predator meat costs too much energy to ever make economic sense. It quietly hoards poison for an entire lifetime. It tastes worse and breaks down faster. It carries far more disease than anything grazing peacefully in a field. And on top of every single one of those reasons, we spent thousands of years turning the animals at the very top of the food chain into gods and symbols instead of meals. Every ecosystem on the planet runs on that exact same silent arithmetic. Energy climbs upward, and less of it survives every single step of the way. Humans didn't invent the rule that predators don't belong on a plate. We just kept running into it, over and over in every corner of the world until it quietly became instinct. The wolf was never actually on the menu. The math decided that a very long time ago, long before anyone ever wrote it down.